My name is Stacy M. I'm the Extension Educator in Mineral County. I also do some statewide ag programs, and I work with tribes throughout the West on different types of projects, mostly business development, ag development, that kind of stuff, water and land. So today, when I had told Maureen that in this session I wanted to do something a little different. And how many of you have ever heard of a water footprint in here? Okay, I got one. Okay, I had never heard of a water footprint until I was put on a search committee in the College of Science up here with Doug, and we were hiring a water extension specialist. And one of the applicants came in with this really cool presentation about a water footprint for the city of Phoenix. I believe it was for the city of Phoenix. So that's how I first started hearing about this idea of a water footprint. Now when I'm in my meetings, and maybe it's just because I'm paying attention more, I'm beginning to hear this word more and more and more. Last week I just heard this word in our risk management team meeting. We're getting ready to do our ag risk management in the state, and our livestock nutrition specialist was talking about he got this new equipment so he can measure how much water a cow, a steer, or a bull drinks over a period of time and put that in different environments. And he's like, Stacy, by the end of this time, I'm going to have the water footprint of a range cow in Nevada. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So putting this session together, I began to look at this term water footprint, what it means, what it looks like, and to kind of get the conversation started, because to me it's a cool concept. And when I started asking people if they've heard about it, they're saying, no, we really haven't heard about it. I was like, well, in the tribal community, have you heard about it? So, and they're like, no, we haven't really heard about it. But I did get, so I started calling people throughout the United States, Indian Land 10-Year Foundation, First Nations Foundation, and I asked them, do we have anything out there of tribes dealing with water footprints, whether it's for goods or services, or just their whole reservation? And there were some concerns out there, and those concerns was, Stacy, tribes don't want to quantify their water rights. We want to keep them, we do want to help tribes protect their waters. We don't definitely, especially if they're in the middle of a lawsuit, want to do this water footprint that will help them quantify their water rights. But when I started looking into this, I think it's a little different than that. So it's a legal issue. And then the other is, why should they do this? So going through this, and Carol Bishop put this slide in for me yesterday because I was telling her, oh, we're looking at this water footprint for a range cow. And this is just one example. I mean, there's various ways that examples can be put together. And Carol liked the idea of what the green water footprint is, the blue water footprint, and the gray water footprint. But what I want to talk about today, and we're going to have some presenters after I end that are talking about tribal situations as temperatures increase, to just start putting this in the back of your mind about if you see an alfalfa field out there or an alfalfa farm, think about what that water footprint is. Is that alfalfa being used on your reservation? Are you exporting that water out? That alfalfa field takes so much water to grow. Or that range cow takes so much water. And we were joking around yesterday just because we were dealing with feral horses. Wonder what that water footprint of that feral horse is. But that's kind of our future and what we're going to be able to do. So I put this in the context, and I want to keep working on this presentation because it's not totally done yet. And there's a lot more information. So how many of you are aware of the policy eras? The federal policy eras that affected tribes, Indian people. Okay, I got a few of you in here. So what I did is I'm going to put the next few slides, and I don't want to take up a ton of time because I have a lot of speakers after me. But I want you to think in terms of a federal policy era, what our food sources were like, and what do you think the tribal water footprint was at that time? How was it different? Okay, so our first era that we're looking at is the trade and intercourse era, 1790 to 1830. What was happening during that time? There were peaceful government-to-government relations. Tribes were recognized as sovereign nations. You had the Office of Indian Affairs, 1775. It also, we had some regulation, the Trade and Intercourse Act, that also had, and this whole idea of doctrine of discovery. So where was our food at this time? Our sources of food? Mostly hunting, fishing, gathering, and farming. Where were our water sources? We were looking at surface waters, rivers, springs, because you could go wherever you wanted to do that hunting and gathering. Then let's get to 1830 to 1850. You start to see this removal era, the land disputes, the 5 civilized nations. And you know, I'm a movie watcher, so I always watch those movies of the movies of relocating and the Removal Act. Okay, it relocated Indians, the Trail of Tears. So where was our food during this time? What happened when reservations, the hunting and gathering was limited, so you couldn't go where you needed to go anymore. Agricultural practices were also limited because now you're looking at specific areas. So what happened to the water resources? If the areas that you could travel and you were hunting and gathering, you were also restricted to some of those surface water resources. So the access that you had in your food was also limited. So we get to the reservation era, and this is where they started setting up those land bases. This is where they placed Indians on specific pieces of land. You had all of these different acts. They wanted to reduce land conflicts. They really restricted movement. So what happened? Okay, it wasn't a great time. It really wasn't. You had treaties, and if you look back at the treaties, you know, that's kind of an interesting time also because those treaties were put together for specific reasons, and sometimes those weren't in the best benefit of the Indian people that they were dealing with. So what happened to our food? Where was our food? You couldn't feed yourselves, or Indians couldn't feed themselves, so what did we start to see? We started to see those foods come on these lands. What happened to our water? Those water bodies. You know, if you were to look, and we're going to hear a lot about the Walker River Basin today, if you were to think of Walker Lake as this big desert terminal lake, it was within the original boundaries of that reservation that was set up. But then what happened? They want use, so they shorten or shrink the reservation, and all of a sudden that water body is impacted. The tribe's water footprint of what it has access to water and those goods and services of what they can grow and how they can grow it are impacted. So allotment and assimilation era. This is where they started. They had this great idea that American Indians were going to become farmers and ranchers. And giving them their own land to become farmers and ranchers would kind of integrate them into U.S. society. Okay? What impact did that have on food? Well, they began growing food. The government continued to support food because they couldn't grow enough to feed the populations. The other thing during this time was that your farming and ranchers was dictated by an Indian agent. And when they go back and they research extension agents, the Indian agents at the time were under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So actually, as an extension agent myself, it's interesting because when you talk to a lot of your elders on the reservation, and if you had an Indian agent, they would say the farmer in charge. They didn't call him an Indian agent. The farmer in charge would tell us when to plant, what to grow, how to irrigate it, what to do. So that was during this time. So what was our impact to our water resources? Right here. This is where you started to see if they were going to make American Indians become farmers and ranchers, they had to have a way for them to irrigate their lands and to utilize those water resources. But what happened in those projects that we can see now as we look back through history is you had irrigation and irrigation projects that became piecemeals of federal legislation. So they were never fully funded. They were just all these little parts of funding that were put together. Again, your irrigation activities were dictated by your Indian agents. And I think one of the things that we still see is this piecemealing of irrigation infrastructure. Because if you start looking, it's on every reservation that you see. So now we get into this New Deal era, where, you know, the Merriam Report talking about all these things, the lifestyle that Indians were living and how poor that they really had it because of all this previous federal legislation. And we get to the Indian Reorganization Act. So what was the one thing that the Indian Reorganization Act in 1934 did, especially when we look at Nevada tribes? One of the things it did is it stopped the allotment era, but it set up this political entity that we now see a tribal government. And if you're going to look, I know specifically at our tribes in all Nevada. I don't know about Arizona. I know a lot of them were impacted, but their constitution and bylaws were set up under this Indian Reorganization Act. And a lot of them were the same. So, while American Indians were beginning to farm and starting to grow things, they still needed the support of food. And they started this entity that the U.S. government could work with called a tribe. And there were some groups in the United States that did not want to form this whole government entity. We're going to hear from one of those tribes, Hopi, here in just a little bit about their drinking water, but they've got a unique cultural history as far as governance on that reservation. They were one that denied this IRA of 1934. So what happened to our water footprint? You continue to do the farming activities. You continue to struggle with the infrastructure and how things used to be irrigated. Or if you weren't irrigating, how did your dry land farming? You learned to adapt. But at the same time, if you did have that government, tribal government, then the federal government had a way to work with the tribe for needs and resources. So it was a start. And then what do we do? In 1945, we go backwards and we have the termination era where they terminated a bunch of tribes, and no longer could those tribes that were terminated access federal resources. And then they disbanded the BIA. So that's when they started relocating and the relocation program. And we saw this in our tribal college project too, that we had some elders that showed up to our focus group that were part of this relocation and been relocated into the cities. So what happened to our food? Government was no longer responsible for food for those tribes that they had terminated. They were kind of decreasing their resources to the tribes. Food subsidies stopped. What happened to our water footprint? Government was no longer responsible for providing those water resources. Dollars for the irrigation infrastructure and the infrastructure to do farming and ranching stopped. And then we get where we are today, 1965. And I believe that we're starting a new era, or we've already started that era. But I want to talk today about this self-determination era, because this is really important, as when this started, Indian tribes for the first time had say over their programs and services in their environment. Through federal policy, they've really not had a say. I mean, the New Deal era gave them kind of opportunity, but they really didn't have say to run their own programs until 1965. So what happened to the food? The government was responsible for that food support and food services. Indian tribes could now decide how they wanted those services provided. And government food subsidies kind of became a mainstay. And why I'm bringing up the food is because there's a lot of talk about traditional foods, and some of the research when you look at it, or articles, one article that I read the other day was talking about a traditional food, and they were talking about fry bread. Well, fry bread was not a traditional food. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions. Where did fried bread come from? I believe it came from those food subsidies. That's where it came from. So what did that do to our tribal water footprint? The government now was again responsible for that support of the infrastructure for water resources and the development. And the tribes had the ability to even run their own irrigation projects and their own their irrigation projects and their own like farms, or however they wanted to do that. They could do it the way they wanted to do it. They didn't necessarily need to listen to that farmer in charge. So to kind of set this impact of ERAS on tribal water footprint, I think the questions that I have is, how has the access and availability of water resources impacted your tribe over time? Because we have, one of our jobs through Native Waters is to try to get tribes to plan for their future water use, to start looking at how much water things use. So if we look at the history and kind of think about that, when did your tribe, or did you ever get infrastructure to gain access to water resources? We still have some tribes in Nevada that have not gotten that support. And we were talking about that yesterday. And then how has legal processes impacted? You know, if you're a tribe and you have the most senior water right on a river, but you're located at the end of the system, are you always going to get? How is that going to impact your water availability? Those are the types of things that we start looking. And what is that future of your tribal water footprint going to look like? Now this is kind of my last slide, and like I said, I just wanted to kind of set it up for the speakers that are going to come after me, because they're going to be dealing with, and what I asked them is, we know that our temperatures are increasing. They're increasing across the West. And how does that change things? So today we're going to listen to, Selmi's here, or I don't have my agenda. The Hopi is here to talk about their drinking water. They just went through a 50-year drought that impacted the way that they managed, that impacted the water footprint of the goods and services that they have on their reservation. Doug is here that's going to talk a little bit about why our climate is changing and why water footprint is important. Randy and Elvita are here to talk about the Walker River irrigation system and how those increased temperatures are impacting some of their management. So those are the types of things that we're hoping, and then we'll come back at the end of today to discuss some of the things here, just begin this discussion of looking at. And I believe if the tribe can come up with its total water footprint, I'm not sure how all that would look quite yet, but to start this discussion of looking at the difference is kind of like putting together your agriculture economic development plan, or your agriculture or your quality of life plan on your reservation. And I believe looking at this is just, to me it's pretty cool, to you it may not be cool, but at the end we'll come back and we'll talk about it a little bit. Do I have any questions before Doug gets up here and talks about our climate and how that relates to a water footprint?
So, like Stacey said, I'm gonna go from the idea that on a reservation or any other area where you're irrigating to grow things, that a lot of things need to be considered. There are a lot of important details when you ask the question, how does a changing climate impact what I'm trying to produce as an agricultural producer? In this case, I'm going to talk about the Walker River Basin and an area just upstream of the Walker River tribal boundary. And it's just, the only reason I chose that was because I did a bunch of work in the area a few years back, and I had a lot of what I think are really interesting results handy that make the point really well, the points that I'd like to make. So I'm going to talk about a couple different kinds of climate change. When people say climate change, and, I don't know what comes to your mind, but I think of it getting warmer. And that's definitely an important component of climate change. But there's also the idea that there's a lot more kind of high frequency events occurring, a lot more droughts and a lot more floods. And that's not often included in climate change modeling studies. So I've broken my talk into kind of two different scenarios. Well, three really. I have a baseline scenario, just actually what happened over a historic period of time. And then I'm going to develop a future warming scenario based on the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, predicting that it's going to be warmer in the Walker Basin. And, oh great, and then I'm going to have a third scenario where I forget about the warming for a second. Let's just see what happens if we have an intense drought. How does that impact the water resources with respect to what is trying to be grown? And more importantly, how much that stuff's worth in terms of money. So, looks like we're ready to go. Let's see if this works. This is one of my favorite doomsday climate change slides. Let's see if I do this right. Yeah. So these are actually big trees, really large trees, this big around, in the West Walker River, kind of before the river comes down from, crosses the mountain front and goes out into Antelope Valley, Smith Valley, Mason Valley, and then on into the tribal area. But these are evidence of past fairly significant droughts that occurred in the area. And I'll get to that in a second. So just a little bit of background on the Walker River Basin. I wanted to point out that the headwaters of the basin, that's where all the water comes from. Tremendous snowpack builds in these mountainous areas. And there are a few different ranges here, but most of the water comes from the Sierra. It flows down the West Walker River and the East Walker River. They come together. I've got Antelope Valley, Smith Valley, Mason Valley, and then the tribal area, and then the terminal lake, the actual Walker Lake itself. This is approximately the size of it today. And from some work that I've done in the past with a bunch of other people, this kind of gray outline here, that's where we think the lake would be if there wasn't any irrigation going on upstream. But that's a whole other story. So let's see what else I have to say here. There are significant irrigation demands. Again, Antelope Valley, Smith Valley, Mason Valley. Tremendous amount of alfalfa and other crops are being grown there. Again, the reservation and the terminal lake are at the bottom of the system. I'd argue you really have to think about all the components of the water deliveries. There's surface water, obviously, and then there are two really small reservoirs. They're small in my mind, at least compared to the snowpack. I think of the snowpack as a big seasonal reservoir. There's a small reservoir on the West Fork and on the East Fork. And then there's a tremendous amount of groundwater in the basin, particularly in the lower areas. And of course, like any other basin, in an arid or semi-arid environment, the conjunctive use of groundwater and surface water, the connectivity between surface water and groundwater are a big deal. And some people don't like to view it that way, but in reality, they are connected, and they need to be both considered. So the question is, how do changes in the climate impact water availability and use? This is just a slide of some model results from a global climate model used with the IPCC, again, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. The stuff you hear about all the time, you know, in the next 100 years, between now and 2100, you know, the predictions are we're going to get warmer in this part of the country. The precipitation is kind of uncertain. It's thought in some places to increase a little bit, decreasing a little bit, but most people believe that these intense events, intense droughts, and intense floods will become more frequent. So what I've done is taken some of that information and put together some scenarios. I looked at 2 time periods, a common modern climatology, 1981 through 2010, and something predicted in the future, 2031 to 2060. And I've just differenced them and tried to estimate what the IPCC, for a given IPCC scenario, how is the temperature thought to be different in the future. And the scenario I chose is like the worst case scenario. It's called RCP 8.5, business as usual. So assuming, you know, the government just continues to go down the same path that we're currently on. And I know you can't see these, but the bottom line from this analysis is what I get is kind of a monthly change in temperature. January plus 2.2 degrees Celsius, February 1.8 degrees Celsius, and so on. All the values are on the order of an increase of 2 degrees Celsius. In some cases like August, thought to be about 2.7 degrees Celsius. And this is over climatology. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these changes and I'm going to apply them to real historic period that occurred, 1996, I think, through 2011. And I'm going to say, how would that period have been different if it was on the order of a couple of degrees warmer every month? What happens when we do that? Let's just see. So, oops. So the other thing is how is the precipitation supposed to be changing in the future? This is just a map, a figure from a report that I grabbed to show you that, you know, it's this yellowish color, and that's somewhere between 0 and minus 5%. So for the sake of this experiment, I'm just going to say it's 0. In the first scenario, we're not going to look at a change in precipitation, just a warming climate. We've done a lot of other work in the basin, and so have a lot of other people. And again, here are our Walker tree stumps up in the West Walker River. And there's all kinds of evidence from these tree stumps and other vegetation, trees and other types of shrubs that have been found in Mono Lake, which is just over the watershed divide to the south, and in Walker Lake itself, that point to 2 major droughts. One that lasted 240 years. It was from about 1850 to 1090, and another one from 1140 to 1320. So 240 years and 180 years. Really long droughts, and it was really dry. And what happened was there was so little snowpack, and it came out so slowly, that these trees were able to grow in the stream channel in this particular part of the Upper Walker River Basin. And, we know that this had to have happened. There's bedrock on one side. There's a 100,000-year-old glacial moraine on the other side. The river couldn't have been anywhere else. These trees would have died if the river submerged their roots for more than approximately 14 days. So there have been scientists that have come out and cored these trees, counted the rings. They know how old the trees were when they died. They also radiocarbon dated the rings so they know when they were living. So that's how they back out these 2 drought periods. This is just some students that I've taken out there, just to give you an idea of how big these trees are. Anyway, why I'm bringing this up is the most recent drought we had, 2012 to 2015-ish, however you want to count that drought. The reduction in precipitation, the percentage difference from normal that we experienced over that drought period, we've estimated to be almost exactly the same as the percent change in precipitation that caused these 2 major drought periods to occur and create this evidence in the Walker River Basin. The more recent drought didn't last for 180 years or 240 years. So the point is here, these things are happening now, and they've certainly happened in the past. In the past, obviously, those droughts were natural variability. They didn't have anything to do with humans emitting carbon into the atmosphere. And the modern drought, the modern warming and associated droughts are thought to be associated with that. The point is, droughts happen, and we need to consider the drought as well as the warming. So in this case, I'm not going to consider any warming. So I have three model runs: a baseline model run over the period 1996 through 2011. I have something called an IPCC scenario, an increase in temperature by approximately 2 degrees Celsius per month. And, oh, these are all numbered 1, that's fantastic. And then another one, it wasn't that way earlier, but I do like this better. And then something I'm calling an MCA scenario. That stands for the Medieval Climatic Anomaly. But just think of it as a drought scenario, where we decrease the precipitation the same amount as those Medieval Climatic Anomaly tree scenarios, as well as the more recent 2012 to 2015 drought. And then we'll continue on with our ones here. And I would like to look at the system-wide results. So I'm going to look at all of, I think it's just Mason Valley. And we'll get some kind of idea of what the results mean in terms of the entire system. But then we'll go ahead and look in at areas, ditches that come off the river that serve high priority water right farms, and a ditch that serves a low water priority farm. And I'll show you that it makes a difference that we look at this water right priority as well. And then place the context of our work in terms of crops and money. Well, and that's number 2. Yeah. So, I have a whole bunch of models, and I'm not going to talk about them today. But the point is, we ran our models, and there are over 30 ditches. We just looked at, in this case, these are all the ditches kind of averaged out. And the way to look at these plots is on the x-axis, I've got the year, 1996, 97, all the way through 2011. And this first set is the baseline. This is what really happened. And what I have here is the crop demand. And if you look at the whole bar, that's how much, and these are in weird units, thousands of acre feet of water. So this is one ditch. And if you took the crops that were growing off of that ditch, on the farms on that ditch, they needed this amount of water. So whatever this is here, all the way to the top. They needed all that water if they were going to completely satisfy the crop demand. But only this amount, this kind of dark brown, that's all that was delivered to them from the surface water. This little teal box above it, that's how much the farmers were able to add to what was delivered by pumping water from their farm. And the little blue box on top is how much they were shorted, how much they could not satisfy the potential total crop that they would like to have grown. And so you might ask yourself, why don't they just pump enough to get all of their demand satisfied? Not everybody in this system has what's called supplemental pumping rights. You use a supplemental pumping right when the water right, the surface water right you have, isn't satisfied. You can pump up to what your surface water right would have allowed. But not everybody has those. Why not? Because if you have a high priority right, why would you buy pumping rights? It doesn't make much sense. And we'll see that in a second. So, what do the results look like? So that's the baseline. So you kind of have to look at these and look at this one and say, how are they different? And look at the shortages. They don't look terribly different. And the reason, but yet these dark bars are a little different when you increase the temperature for the IPCC scenario. What happens is there's a lot of supplemental pumping increase that's allowed to take place, such that there's overall, over the whole time period, approximately a 30% shortage in change in shortage. So the change in the blue bars here compared to these blue bars here. Although there was a 22% change in surface water delivery, there was an increase of 25% groundwater pumping. Now, when you have the drought scenario and not the temperature increase, look at the size of these darker bars compared to the baseline. They really drop off. And in some cases, this year, 2002 and 2008, essentially almost no water was delivered on average over the entire system. But some people were able to pump. But you can still see a tremendous amount of shortage compared to the baseline. So here, the overall shortage was change in shortage was about 100% of what originally occurred. Tremendous amount of surface water shortage over the system, but a lot of groundwater pumping. So now we'll look at a high priority ditch. Same exact idea, same time period, baseline, IPCC temperature increase, and the MCA drought precipitation increase. Notice that there's very little pumping on this high priority water right ditch. That's because most people don't own supplemental pumping because they expect to get their water most of the time. They do live with some shortages. That's what they actually were shorted over the farms on average over the whole ditch. When you change the temperature, it doesn't look a lot different to me. There are years like this year where there's a lot less surface water delivered. They can't pump because they don't have the right. They have very few rights to pump, so their shortage increases. In the drought year, they're in big trouble because they really can't pump. Even though they have very high senior water rights, this year they almost grow nothing. And these years are pretty bad for them as well. We move to the low priority ditch. Same exact concept again, same years, baseline, temperature increase, precipitation decrease, drought. And this looks a little different. Look at the shortages here. They look a lot like the high priority in the system-wide to me, but they get there because of a lot of pumping, particularly in the drought years. You warm up the temperature, and they respond by pumping more than they did in the baseline. You get rid of the precipitation in a drought, and they respond by pumping a lot more. Look at 3 years, essentially no surface water delivered. They would have a tremendous amount of shortage if they were not able to pump. 3 more years, almost 4 years in a row there. So it's a big deal. It makes a big difference how you look at a system. If you're going to average everything, or if you're going to go in and look at high priority water rights versus low priority water rights. If you have the ability to do supplemental pumping, these things make a big difference. So the next thing I did, I decided for this presentation today to just look at this ditch, the low priority ditch, and say how do these 3 scenarios compare in terms of the actual crop value that's produced. And these are just on average what was being grown over those crops on the ditch during that period of time. A lot of pasture, alfalfa. I had somebody once ask me what is fallow and how do you grow it. That was fun. But anyway, so this is the distribution of crops. And I took a report that actually Stacy and Kenda, is Kenda here? Oh, good, so I can talk about her. No, they put out a report quite a while back about the value of these crops from the Walker River Basin in terms of money. And I stole some of those numbers here. They're dated, but whatever. This is just kind of a comparison to give you an idea of what's going on. So when you take the amount of acreage for each of the crops and you assign these values, dollars per acre of the different crops, this is the total amount that you could get if you had all of the water delivered for the crop, the total potential water delivered. So let's take a look at what this means. So that's our $739,000. That's how much you could grow every year. If every year you had all the water you needed. The blue line is what actually happened, the baseline. So it moves around depending on how much water was delivered, what kind of pumping could take place. The red line is what happens when you increase the temperature by approximately 2 degrees Celsius. So this is coming right out of your pocketbook if you're on that ditch. And then if you instead have the drought, it's pretty dramatic, right? So I don't know, I thought that was pretty interesting. It makes a difference. How does this connect to water footprinting? Well, what are you going to do with these crops? Are you going to sell them? Are you going to use them yourself to feed your own livestock? Any way you look at it, it's going to cost you money if you need to go and replace what you couldn't grow. And I think it connects really nicely to the concept of water footprinting. So in summary, there's a few things here that I wanted to say, but I think I've said most of them. If you're going to look at these, the connection between climate change and how your water is being used and what difference it makes, you need to really think about the individual system and what's important. And what's important in terms of what types of water resources you use, what types of water rights you have. In this case, these are all folks that are upstream of the tribe. The tribe definitely has to look at this stuff because what's left over is what they get, is what gets delivered, as Stacy said. So if you want to know in the future how climate change is going to impact anything that's happening below the system, you have to understand this as well. So anyway, that's what I brought today. Are we doing questions, Stacey, or just going right to the next one?
I'm just going to give you the microphone. How did you say that again?
Okay, for everybody, my name is Selwyn Sikatwaptiwa. I am from the Hopi Reservation. And I'm here to speak a little bit about the management that's going on for the Hopi tribe. I don't work for the Hopi tribe. Well, let me give you a little background on myself. My job title is a water commissioner, and my job is to manage and operate a public drinking water system and the wastewater collection system for the community of Kekochimovi, which is a Hopi village. And that is also where I'm from. I'm from the village of Kekochimovi and Hopi. So that kind of gives you a little background on who I am and what I do. So the effects of drought on Hopi. Through my work, we are seeing well levels lowered. And these are all drinking water wells. That's my field, and so that's where I'm talking about. That's where I'm coming from. There's the lowering of the water table in these areas, and we're seeing the effects through a lot of the springs, the natural springs out there are drying up, and a lot of these are cultural sensitive springs used in religious activities and traditional other uses like that. So those levels are decreasing, and some of these springs have actually dried up and no longer are producing water. So we can see that, and to give you a little bit more background on Hopi, where we live, we don't have any surface water right there. We totally are reliant on groundwater sources. Traditionally, we got all our drinking water from the springs and seeps, and the annual, of course, rainfall and runoff that came, that we captured and used for our daily use. There's not a lot of agricultural use on Hopi, commercial agriculture use, let me state it that way. There is a lot of traditional farming. Any of you that are familiar with Hopi know that we are a dry farming community, which means that we are totally reliant on Mother Nature, bringing in rainfall, the snow melt, and that's the moisture that is used and realized for our crops on Hopi. So there's one community on the western edge of Hopi that does irrigate. They are able to capture the water that comes from springs, and they dam it up, and then they have the irrigation ditches that run out to the fields and are able to use that. So that's one community, that's the only community that uses that irrigation in their farming methods. This year was a very bad year for Hopi farming. We had very little to no rainfall this year, so our crops suffered. There were only a few families that were lucky enough to harvest any crops this year, and we're talking about our traditional corn, beans, melon, squash. Those are traditional agriculture products that Hopi grows. So we're seeing the effects in that area because we're totally reliant on that. Hopi does not irrigate other than that one community that I told you about. We rely on Mother Nature to bring us the moisture that we need. We are also unique in the way that we are established, the way that we govern ourselves. The Hopi tribe, as a tribe, is made up of 12 Hopi communities. Each Hopi community is autonomous and governs its own self, how they choose to govern themselves. But we are all under, and we call them villages out there. We're all 12 different villages that come together as a Hopi tribe. So, this drought that we're going through has really impacted us to a core, to our hearts, because we're tied to the land just like all other native tribes out there. We have a strong connection to the land. We have responsibility, we feel, to take care of the land, just like all the other native tribes in the country. So we see those effects, and we have this strong tie to the land, and it's affecting us in a lot of different ways. Some of the things that the Hopi tribe is trying to do, or is in the process of doing, is right now we're working on in establishing a plan for this drought. It's in the works. It's not finalized. So it hasn't been realized to this point in time. Things that are being done out there right now to help in the situation of the drought is livestock reduction. Livestock uses up a lot of water. Stacy just mentioned footprints of what animals use. Hopi, it's sheep, horses, cattle. Those are the three main livestock that are out there roaming in Hopi. So the mandatory reduction, this year it was a mandatory 30% reduction on that, which would hopefully, assist in how much water is being consumed out there by the livestock. And that's not including the wildlife in the area. We all live together. We all share the same resources. We all rely on these same resources. So it's stressed even more when there's lack of rain, as you all know. So that's one thing that we're doing. And it's impacting us out there in the windmills, out in the range. The levels are dropping in those windmills. Some are altogether not even producing any water anymore. So, when the infrastructure is so aged, some of these windmills and drinking water wells are 50 plus years old. So they lived their lifespan. And we're is working on and has drilled several wells. We've created a new well field, and right now we're in the stages of designing and bringing that water to the Hopi communities. And it was mainly initially it was intended to address the arsenic issue out here in the Southwest. Hopi communities are affected by that, by the arsenic in the groundwater. So these wells were drilled to address that issue, and it's mainly on the eastern portion, eastern half of the reservation that are above the arsenic level. And these well fields were drilled and intended to provide water to these communities that are affected by that arsenic problem. But the drought continues to go on, and it's affecting everybody else on the west side that does not have the arsenic issue to deal with, because we're seeing the levels in our drinking water wells being reduced, and we have to look for alternative sources to get this drinking water.
How many feet do you guys go down on your drinking water wells?
Well, in the last 20 years, we've probably dropped about at least 2 feet. In my experiences in the wells that I've gone out and measured. So, and when you're totally reliant on groundwater like we are, the water that comes down right on top of us in rain and snow, that doesn't recharge the groundwater supply for us. Basically runs off and goes downstream. Where we get our recharges from is the Rocky Mountains. It goes under and goes into the aquifers. So with the lack of snowpack in the mountains, it's kind of a scary thought for us, because our groundwater aquifers aren't being recharged at the rate that they were previous to the drought. And being totally reliant on groundwater with no surface water around, what does that mean? It's a scary thought. And there is litigation going on right now. Water rights have been talked a lot about. We've been hearing a lot of that today. But it's still litigation. Nothing's been determined yet. You don't have a solid number that I can give you that we can quantify to say this is how many acre feet of water that Hopi gets. It's still in litigation right now, so we don't know that number yet. And in order to get that, to realize the water from the Colorado River, Little Colorado River, we still need to put infrastructure in place. And you're talking hundreds of miles of infrastructure to reach Hopi. Crossing reservations and everywhere else. So there's a lot that goes into getting the right of ways and all that to be able to get it to us. So we had a lot of obstacles that we have to, a lot of hoops we gotta jump through, a lot of work that needs to be done on that. But we, and as Native peoples across the country, we've been here thousands and thousands of years. Thousands of years. And we're still going to be here thousands of more years. But we have to be smart about how we are going to address this situation that we're in. In the past, we were able to move. We weren't landlocked. We didn't have boundaries. We could, if it dried up here, we could move to another place, the greener pastures, if you will, and survive. But now we're stuck in the reservations that are established. Can't no longer just get up, pack up, and move. Can't do that anymore. So we have to take a realistic look at our water supply and make sure we do the right thing. It's not for us in the present day, but it's for the future. Our children that have not arrived yet. So it's up to us to protect this resource. And it's the most valuable resource, in the world for humans. Without water, you can't survive. Water is life, as someone put it. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, literally. Sandstone rock in our case. There's a lot of sandstone out there. So, we have to be realistic in our plans. And currently, the Hopi tribe is in a bad spot financially, and there's not a lot of revenue there for us, even if we did get, water rights, or to get water from the Colorado River. We wouldn't have the finances to build the infrastructure because of the lack of financial resource. So, what does that mean to Hopi? It's a scary thought, but it's what we're living at right now currently, and the future doesn't look too good either. Is it man-made, or is this just Mother Nature's way of thinning the herd? I don't know. But things that we are doing out in Hopi, like I mentioned, livestock reductions, better management. In my community, we have since 2012, we established a water conservation policy, but that was more out of necessity, and that was because we lost the ability to store water. Our storage tanks leaked, so we had to take them offline. And one of our wells went down. It's no longer productive. It's 50 plus years old. We're not probably about 60 years old. So it's lived its life. It's done. You got to do another one. Got to drill another well. So hence, the tribe has drilled the well field up to the northeast of the reservation, and is in the process of designing the pipeline to bring it down to the Hopi communities. It's going to be about 25 miles of pipeline. So you're looking at about $25 million to $30 million to get that done. And without the financial resources, that means, looking at grants, going outside to get the finances to do this. So it's kind of bleak right now, but we're not losing faith. We're not giving up. Like I said, we've been there for thousands of years and will continue to remain. The Hopi tribe is working on the drought management plan. It's currently in its draft stages, and I personally do not work on this because I'm not a tribal, I don't work for a tribal department that is handling this. However, I am giving them information on what my system, how my system is, the levels in our drinking water wells are going down, and how much water we produce a year. My small community of 275 connections, last year we pumped from our 2 drinking water wells, we pumped 22 million gallons of water. That's way above the national average of consumption for residential domestic use. A lot of that goes for irrigation for home gardens, for livestock, because the windmills out in the range aren't working, people are hauling water out to their livestock, so they're hauling the good drinking water because our windmills are not producing like they did in the past because of lowering water levels. So, you know, this impacts a lot in us in a lot of ways. We do have a couple of organizations out there that are doing their best to assist Hopi communities. One is the Village Utility Management Cooperative, which I am the president of that board. I sit on that board, and basically it's a cooperative of member villages that get together and share equipment. The Hopi communities are very small, and with the financial resources that we have, we couldn't possibly, you know, go out and purchase all this specialized equipment for water and wastewater utilities. So this cooperative is able to provide us with those kind of specialized equipment to operate and manage our systems. That's one organization. And the other one is I mentioned is the Hopi Arsenic Mitigation Project, the HAMP project, which is the well fields and then bringing that water down to the Hopi communities. That's one of the ways, or two of the ways that we're working to minimize the effects of drought on Hopi. The impacts of this drought, you know, there's a lot. Health, fire services is limited. You know, the fire protection, you know, it's very limited out there. Most of the systems on Hopi have been built by the Indian Health Service. If you know anything about Indian Health Service, you know that they only design for residential use. So they don't even factor in fire flow or nothing like that. So, and these systems are very old. A lot of them were designed in the 70s and were piecemeal adding on as the communities grew. So it's aging infrastructure, like everybody else in America, you know, that we're dealing with, and we're having to patch and fix. So it's a lot for a small tribe like us to deal with. So, you know, it's difficult to put into words what the impacts are going to be if you don't know how much rainfall and snowpack you can get from year to year. And the predictions and the numbers that we just saw, you know, it's even more bleak, to say the least. And, you know, we're a strong religious community culturally. We're one of the oldest living cultures that are still intact in the Americas. And we still practice our religion, centuries and centuries old. And we believe in that. And we have faith that our Creator will be merciful on us and lead us into the future.
Elvita Martinez from the Walker River Tribe. She's going to talk about the tribes, kind of their historical story. Okay. I think this one is forward. This one goes backwards. And this one's a green pointer in the middle. Do you want this mic? Okay.
All right, can you hear me? Is that one on? Is it good?
Can you guys hear me?
Can you? Let me talk louder, wake you up. Wake up over there. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elvita Martinez. I'm with the Walker River Paiute Tribe Water Resources Department. We're located 100 miles down the road towards Las Vegas. Welcome here to Nevada. You know, it's good to see some of you Nevada people and I guess some people from Arizona and I don't know where else, but again, welcome here. When Stacy asked us to talk about a footprint, we're like, what the hell are you talking about now, Stacy? You know, so it's good she gave us a little definition of what we're going to talk about. So this is my best attempt at a footprint. All right, we're going to talk about irrigation mainly, irrigation management on the Walker River Reservation. We have 44 miles of irrigation canals, and like most people, our system is really old. You know, it was really enhanced in 1975 where we put in a lot of line ditches, but now, of course, that's all fallen apart. Right now, our system is managed by the tribe and by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Their office out of Carson City, which is the Western Nevada agency. Most of our irrigation water, it is stored in a 10,000 acre-foot reservoir called Weber Reservoir, and we irrigate on our reservation for 180 days. We irrigate up to 21 acres of alfalfa, but for a few years, just like Doug said, we grew fallow for a while. So once we grew fallow, we didn't get totally back to the 2,100 acres. So right now we're irrigating, I believe, around 16 to 1,800 acres right now of alfalfa. And again, like Doug says, we're located at the end of the Walker River Basin. Here's our beautiful Weber Reservoir, and at the far end is the dam, Weber Dam. We had that worked on like 10 years ago. It was like a high hazard dam, but our reservoir, it used to hold 13,000 acre feet, but because of a lot of sediment that's in the reservoir now, we can hold up to 10,000 acre feet. And gee, I feel really good. I feel sad for the Hopi tribe because this year was a good year for us, you know. And again, our snowpack comes from the Sierra Nevadas. So again, you know, we depend on these big mountains and we depend on snow and we depend on that to come down. And Randy will talk a little bit more later about it, but you know, again, we're at the end of the system. We have the oldest water rights, but yet we get to fight with everybody upstream. And of course, those fights have been going on in my whole tribal lifetime with my tribe, and I've been there for over 30 years. But, you know, we've been in litigation for over 20. So, I guess in the scheme of things, you know, in the lifetime and how long as natives have been around here, maybe that's not so long. But, you know what? We dig our heels in and we're never going to stop fighting, are we? I don't think so, especially when it comes to water. Another thing that we've done over the years is we've had to do studies. And these have really helped us. With our irrigation system in 2013, we worked with consultants out of Arizona, Franzoid Consultants, and they did, they analyzed our whole irrigation system. You know, to come out and see what we need to do to upgrade the system. You know, every gate, every ditch, every canal, lateral, whatever else we need out there. So we need like $15 million. You know, and that's not all that much. But that's what we need to fix things. And right now, again, we don't have that money. But we keep pounding the pavement. We're always trying to put in for money, and we'll just keep at it. Another study that we had done in 2013 was a seepage study. And again, what it did was it identified the areas of the system that needed work done to save water for Walker Lake. USGS looked at 15 years of data. They looked at soil types, flow conditions, and depth to groundwater, and determined that there were losses in different parts of the system from 50 to 725 acre feet per year. And the reason that this study was done was for us to determine where could we save most water so we can save it in the system so the water could go down to Walker Lake. Again, the lake, like Doug said previously, or Stacy said, it used to all be within the bounds of the reservation. Right now, we only supposedly own just the north end of Walker Lake. But again, you know, we have cultural ties to the lake, and we'll do whatever we can to try to save water to get it to our lake. Right now, our lake has so much sediment in it that there's no longer any fish surviving in there. Used to be a great fishery for the cutthroat trout, but now there is no fish at all. Being that we have a lot of water coming down this year, you know, we did have fish coming down the Walker River being pushed down into Walker Lake, but there's not a sustainable fishery. Of course, someday we want to be like Pyramid Lake, where they have a lot of water and they got a lot of big fish over there. You know, that's what we want to be. We were that, you know, many, many moons ago in my lifetime. You know, that happened. So that's gone away. So again, our tribe is fighting for that, just to get more water down to Walker Lake. We've been working with other entities to get water, and we're going to start seeing some of the additional water go down to the lake starting next year. So it's a work in progress, you know, and again, if we can get enough water down to Walker Lake, we are going to see fish again in 20 years. You know what? How old is Randy M going to be then? I don't know. I don't know if he'll ever be able to fish down there. He's old now. But anyway, you know, that's what we're looking at. Just like we always said, we're looking out for the future. You know, it's sad that we saw that in our lifetime. It went away, and now we got to fight and keep on working to get those things back that we saw and depended on in our lifetime. You know, some projects that we worked on. We're always working on projects. Our department, we cover and deal with a lot of issues. We deal with irrigation, water rights, non-point source, water quality, agriculture, rangeland, conservation, law enforcement. So we have a small department, but we deal with a lot of issues. And, you know, we'll just continue on. We're a small tribe compared to a lot of other tribes. We have a land base of 325,000 acres, which is one of the largest reservations in Nevada. But population-wise, we're small. We have about 750 people that live on our reservation. So what we've done and what we have to do is, again, it's important for us to constantly and always develop partners. You have to have them in this day and age. And our tribe is a poor tribe, just like Hopi tribe. I think we're poorer in your tribe, let me tell you. I see some of your rich people. But anyway, so we work a lot with the BIA, USDA, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, and NIFWF, which is a national federation.
Fish and Wildlife Foundation.
Okay, that one. We work with them, you know, to get funding. And so our thing is we develop good relationships with all of these people, and I've been around a long time, so I know a lot of them, and they know me, and some of them like me, and some of them don't, but I don't really care. Where's that boss guy that was here yesterday? But the thing is we need to work with all of these agencies, and we need to be involved. One of the big projects that we did to begin on our irrigation system, because we determined that a stretch of unlined canal needed to do something. We needed to do something, line it or throw in a pipe. So early this year, again, we did a big pipeline installation project. It was funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We called it the Canal 2 project. 3 miles were identified for the pipeline. In March, phase 1, which was completed, where we installed 1 mile of 48-inch pipe, cost $1.8 million. And so right now, phase 2 and 3, we don't have enough money to do that, but you know, again, we're still after getting that money to continue that stretch of ditch, that canal lining, you know, and Randy will talk a little bit about how successful that was. We worked with a great contractor out of Arizona, and it was one of the best projects I think that we had that just went very smooth. My sister Marlene says, well, we got to throw in pictures. Nobody just likes to look at things. But again, you know, way back when we grew up, you know, we lived in the ditches. You know, that was our entertainment, right? Everybody go jump in the ditch because you didn't have anything else. We were lucky we had Walker Lake, Weber Reservoir, and the ditches. But way back when, you know, when I was young working for the tribe, one of the other people I worked with, her name was Anita Collins, she used to say, there's pesticides in those ditches. We need to get those kids out of there. So her, me, and another lady, we said, well, let's build a swimming pool. Everybody in church, yeah, right. Yeah, you guys gonna do that? Well, you know what? We did. And we worked at saving money for a few years, and we built a swimming pool, 35,000-gallon swimming pool. We're the only reservation in Nevada that has our own swimming pool for the last 40 years. We've had, I don't know, our kids love it. It's used all summer long. Here's a picture here of a beautiful mural on the wall there, and that beautiful mural got painted because some of our local people thought it was good to do graffiti, you know. But again, look what we have. We ended up with a beautiful mural. This year we put in a new slide for the pool. The health department runs and maintains the pool now, and I didn't add it in there, but they added in a big old side area with tables, chairs, a fire pit in a nice shape, and it's just a great area. But again, you know, what we saw is the kids, you know, are out of the ditches and they're in the pool because it's there for them, you know. So again, they're learning to swim, they're being watched. It's located right between the tribal gym and the Boys and Girls Club. So it's an ideal location. That's just one of my things I always got to pat myself on the back on, because you know what? I think that's one of the best things I ever worked on. You know, 40 years ago. So always do things, and again, we're doing them for the kids in the future. Another project that we've worked on, not me, but one of our people in our department, Roy Begay, who's a non-point source guy, works a lot with the Cattle Association, is going out again and working on range wells. You know, again, we always say keep the kids out of the ditches. Well, we also need to keep the cattle out of the river. You know, again, they get the wells are needed out on the ranges, and again, there's always the maintenance issues and everything. This project is really doing well out there on one of the cattle range areas. The solar panels went in, again, very successful project. Another project that we did a few years ago, again, it was along the river, downriver, there used to be like a siphon that went under the river where the irrigation water went under the river. But again, you know, that was all coming apart. Then a flume was built over the river, you know, to shove the irrigation water over the river. But then there was all the problems with the old siphon that went underneath. So that was removed, and a big roll of this rock was put in. We worked closely with the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on this project. And again, we worked with the Bureau of Reclamation and a very good contractor out of California on this one. So again, I'm just thinking, you know what? When we do projects, we do a damn good job. So when I need a job, just... Another thing though, again, like we're talking about today, is the drought situation. Again, we're fortunate that Marlene Begay in our department has been really active in working on climate issues. So again, you know, she worked on a climate change adaptation plan for our tribe. And again, it's very important that we do plan for these things. So we've been working on this since 2013. This report summarizes the research completed from 2013 to October 2017 on 1, possible future climate changes, climate impacts, and potential adaptation strategies for the tribe. And again, this is an ongoing project. And like everybody says here, water is most important. Walker River and the wetlands. Water is the very fabric of life for the Walker River Paiute tribe. Central to our culture and our health, our community and our lives. The snow in the mountains feeds our river and wetlands, which sustain our fish and wildlife, foods and medicines. Water is all things to all that are living, as its importance cannot be overstated. Here's an area that's above Weber Reservoir. It's our wetland area. This area is probably one of the most natural, successful wetland areas in the state of Nevada. Again, only when there's water. So again, but then again, this is a great migratory area. We've also been working with Great Basin Bird Observatory over the last 8 years. They've identified 200 species of birds that cross our reservation or are on, you know, birds on our reservation. But again, this is a beautiful area. What I did with some of our youth projects that we had is we had our youth go out and build 2 bird watching perches upriver. So again, we want to get our youth involved, explain to them why it's important. You know, a few years ago, I bet you guys didn't know that bird watching was the #1 sport in the nation. Bet you didn't know that, did you? I didn't know it. Let alone did I know we had 200 species of birds crossing our reservation. But, you know, that's very important. Again, we're right on the Walker River. So in the summertime, we have a water camp, and we usually have those bird people come down again and teach our kids about, you know, the birds that are there and how do they sound and how do they identify them and why is it important to have a good, clean area for your birds. You know, to have a lot of birds, you see the birds, it shows you that you have a healthy river system. So again, that's a good thing. So again, when we have water, it's really beautiful upriver. Impacts. Climate change is real, and we are witnesses to the changes, whether you believe you're president or not. Okay? It's election time now. Our planets must be gathered sooner. Walker Lake was once rich with cutthroat trout. We can no longer sustain the fish due to the salinity and the lack of fresh water. The decreasing snowpack and the lack of water has caused our river to run dry and turn our wetlands into a desert. Extended drought and increased heat depletes the little surface water we have left. Noxious weeds are taking over the corridor. More intense windstorms bring up dust, causing health problems. Where there were abundant water and resources, we have seen a significant decrease. We have already lost one of our main resources, our culture, the trout in Walker Lake. Our tribe is the Agaikata, we're the trout eaters. The loss of our trout affects our very cultural identity. This loss may be irreversible. So again, with the climate change, we were lucky we got out of the drought. Because we were in drought up here for like 5 years. Our river was dry. We didn't have any water in it. You know, the dust problem was just terrible. We get a lot of wind. You know, that's one thing we get in our area is the wind and the dust. And then the people having the problems with their asthma and all of those things. And the weeds. You know, the weeds are just a that's a battle we're not winning, that's for sure. Okay, the water footprint. Our future is dependent on the symbiotic relationship with the water, land of our reservation. For most people to be healthy, our water and lands must be healthy. The tribe will protect existing surface water rights and advocate for enforcement of those water rights in the context of a changing climate. The tribe will protect, preserve, and enhance sources of fresh water, including groundwater, to meet the current and future needs of the reservation for domestic, agricultural, economic, and homeland needs. Yesterday in a meeting that we had here with some of the NRCS and FSA people, we were talking about groundwater and how they're now going to be requiring tribes and others to prove that you have water rights if you want to get an old well fixed on your reservation. Of course, it's the state of Nevada that wants to make sure that they have records of our information on groundwater. Of course, my belief and belief of a lot of our tribal members is, you know what, the state of Nevada, you don't know what we have. It's ours. You know, they just want so much control over the water that's what we're fighting for with our tribe. Part of our lawsuit is to determine that the groundwater is ours. So now NRCS wants to say, oh, we can't help you fix that old well because you got to prove to us that you own the water rights. Well, they sure in hell can't prove that they own the water rights, you know. So we're going to run into some issues here that we need to have a big discussion on in Indian country with NRCS and others on what is ours, what belongs to the tribe. Water on your reservation. You know what? Gee whiz, some of our reservation people, you know, like Stacy talked historically, there was these you know, we put us on reservations. And a lot of tribes are put on reservations that had the least resources, the worst resources. And I always tell people a good example of that is right here in Reno. Reno Sparks Indian Colony. Reno was downtown, you know, downtown Reno. They put the Indians over here where they're located at. It was the sewer ponds. That's where they put the colony. That's where they put the Indians. Well, now do you see where the Indians are? Right there by Grand Sierra. Right there by their new Walmart. Right there in a prime location. But back in the day, they put them over there in the sewer ponds, but that didn't remain the sewer ponds. And now they've grown to one of the biggest employers of Nevada for Indian people. They have business all around Reno, Verdi, Hungry Valley, Spanish Springs. So, you know what? By doing that to what they thought was a bad thing for the Reno Indians, it's been nothing but good in the future. So I'm always proud of Reno Sparks and what they did. But that's what happened to Indian people. They try to put us in places that were the worst, right? I don't know if the Hopis were shoved over there where there was no water, you know. We're down there in the desert, but you know what? It's beautiful. Again, the Walker River once ran full through the reservation from one end to the other. Due to the over-allocation of water rights upstream, Walker River is now depleted and Walker Lake has declined to levels unable to sustain any fish. The tribe has lost one of the main cultural foods we depend on. And again, we also, you know, the food, we're always talking about the food. Again, we have to pray for it. This is a medicine rock that's located down at Walker Lake. And if you can kind of see it, I don't know. It's like a fish. It's in the shape of a fish. So if you get up on one side of it and you look down at the lake, you know what? That's what we pray for. That's a medicine rock. If you don't know where it is, you can't see it from the road. So it's not like anybody can go and just go up there and pray because they won't even know where it's at. But again, as Indian people, we have to keep praying for what we need. Management and implementation. Okay, continue to work with the BIA partners so we can have long-term projects done. Again, we need to assess Weber Reservoir and the storage capacity. You know, when we're thinking about possibly dredging the reservoir, right now we've been working with like the Arrington Paiute tribe upstream of us, because upstream of us was an old mine, Anaconda mine, which contaminated a lot of the water. So again, we're having that tested right now because we don't know, you know, we're only 25 miles downriver from this Superfund mine. So we're looking at that. Again, we're going to continue to plan to work on our irrigation system. We're looking at developing a water code, again, for water management and how we can best utilize that. And that's mainly going to be for irrigation water. Again, all of these things affect our native foods, the water does. Again, just right above us, between us and Arrington, great area for picking buckberries. But again, what we're seeing is a lot of the farmers up there are taking over and taking out the buckberry bushes. And so they're getting, the patches are getting smaller and smaller. Plus we don't know what the impacts will be of the water possible contamination. But anyway, over the last few years, we've sent our kids up to learn how to pray, learn how to pick them, learn how to process them, learn how to make jam, learn how to give them away. You know, so that's one of the things, again, really like to see our kids doing that. And I never in my lifetime learned how to make any jelly. I don't know how to do it, but there's a whole bunch of kids on our reservation and the Arrington reservation now that do. So again, we need to have clean water so we can have clean foods. Some of the other things that we'll continue to do.
Coordinator of the native programs, and right now the FERTEP programs are the programs that I manage, along with some of the other programs that we have dealing with the Indian reservations. Well, I'm going to kind of expand on what Elvita went into. A lot of this, some of this is, I'll go over real quick, but you need to kind of know the background of where it's located and the distance of the irrigation laterals and things like that. And I'm going to talk on irrigation management more than anything else of the existing system. So it's going to be a little different than what the others. Again, the Walker River Reservation you saw in Doug and Elvita's presentation is right here. That's where it is. We're about 105 miles, or 100 miles south of Reno, so between there and Vegas. Now, here is a more, of course, I know I had to expand these. I had a bad picture there, so I kind of went in and made it worse, I guess. But up here is Weber Reservoir. That is where the water is stored on the reservation. And then it comes down to about in here, and they have a diversion dam. And on here they have irrigation laterals that come on each side of the river, serving each side of the area coming down through here. So those are the kind of the, so you understand what the system is about. Again, here's some of the background information that, again, Elvita had. One important issue here is that this is the water right for the 180-day period. Now, with the amount of land that we have on the reservation, if we just had that coming down, that would mean that we'd have half of that on each side, which is 13 cubic feet per second on each side of the river. To do that, we would be irrigating the land probably once a month. So that will not work. And without the reservoir on the reservation, we probably would not be able to do any farming. That is one thing there that the reservoir is very important to what we have going. Upstream concerns, we just, as Alvita mentioned, we just came out of a drought. And in the Arrington area, they have become probably the biggest farmers of onions in the state. And because of the amount of money that they make off of those crops, with that dealing with the food safety rules, it is probably, well, I know it is more profitable for them to farm with underground water than it is surface water. So they are going toward doing the more underground water, which during the drought, they did do that, and then we came into the issue of, is the surface water related to the groundwater? And our experience is, yes, it was, because it was the first time in my lifetime that I saw the Walker River dry up where it came into the reservation. And that's only been 20 years, but because I got another 20 years of it, others I'll be 40. So, but anyway, the water is over allocated in the system, and there is not enough to go around. So that's kind of the basic assumption here. Now, as you mentioned, as Alvita mentioned in hers, the laterals and canals, we got 44 miles of ditch on the reservation. So in order to get water to the land tracts, you have to fill those ditches. So you got to fill 44 miles of ditch. Now during droughts, what was done is that it took about 2 to 3 weeks to make our round of irrigation on the reservation to irrigate the lands. So what they would do is, and there was no choice in this, but we would finish irrigating and then they would shut it off, but they would have to shut it off at the reservoir. So you have another 5 or 6 miles above that you had to, before you started irrigation, you had to fill all the ditches and all the river in order to get the water down. So, and all that water comes out of that 26.25 cubic feet per second coming down. So figure how much water is lost during that. And then another thing that we had is this rotational water scheduling. So you couldn't very well dictate, well, you couldn't, I guess, grow some crops that you normally could grow if you had water on access as you needed it. Vegetables, you couldn't do. Because we were, as it was, we were going 21 to about 21 days in between irrigations. Vegetables can't do that, and different crops can't do that. So that's why we kind of relied primarily on the alfalfa. It is a crop that, yes, it takes more water, but it can sustain longer through the dryness to come back. So that is one of the reasons that we did there. Another thing too is that, and everybody does this, we have individual users that use the water periodically, and you get some, no, I don't want to irrigate it, right? But water doesn't know what time it is. So, you know, when it's done, and it's your turn. And on a rotational schedule, you either got to take it or you could do without it. Or if you can, skip and come back. But, you know, if you're daylight irrigators, most of the time you're out of luck. Or you didn't get as much water because you had to be skipped and going on. Another thing that happens during kind of the drought years, well, even now, is that, okay, I'm going to make sure my land gets as much water as we can, because it's not going to come back for a while. So you kind of tend to over-irrigate, which, again, utilizes more water. Is it beneficial? Probably not, but that's just kind of the human nature that, okay, I'm going to make sure I get the amount of water as much water as I can before it's shut off. So, now, climate change. During these last few years, It's warmer in the spring and it's warmer in the fall. We didn't get our first good hard freeze till, I think, let's see, when was it? Monday or Sunday night, I think is when we got it. And most of the time we're about 20 days ahead of this back in September. You know, we're in October now. We got our first hard freeze. And being a farmer, hey, I want things wound down and done by October 1st, but I came through Fallon, man, they got some windrows piled up pretty good over there that they're still farming. So what does this mean? It means that in order to grow those crops, you're going to need additional water to kind of go longer. So, you know, that is one of the effects of that. Another thing is it's been the hottest summer here, degree-wise, ever, I think. Is that right, Doug?
Pretty damn hot.
Yeah.
Put in a pool.
Yeah, Oviedo had the right idea, man. Put in a swimming pool. But what I kind of found too is that during these hot temperatures, when you are irrigating or you over-irrigate, and that water stands on the land for a while, as hot as that sun is, it'll cook those plants to where it reduces the life of those or destroys them. So that's another issue with the climate change. You got to manage better. Otherwise, you're going to be replanting over and sooner and quicker. Now, some of the common things, again, some options to address challenges. One thing is change the sprinkler and drip irrigations. On most reservations, none of us know much about it, how to go about it. That doesn't mean we can't learn, but it's just like trying to teach you as an individual, okay, I'm going to do a new thing. So until you learn how to do that, the new thing, you're kind of reluctant and don't want to jump right into it. And this costs money and technology that you don't know. So you're going to have to learn those items before you can kind of get into that. Another thing that they say is change crops using less water. Right now, because on most reservations, and it's all, I think it's kind of nationwide, is that the equipment used to harvest and put in the crops, that's expensive. I know I just got a tractor in Baylor, man, that's $150,000. How many people farming 20-acre plots can afford that? So that's another big thing that must be considered under here. Again, there's you can do kind of, maybe the tribe can put together the equipment. I don't know, what do you call those, where you gather a bunch of equipment, everybody comes and uses it, co-op. But then you have the maintenance cost. I know that's done before. Say one guy takes it out and then they break it and then that's it. Who fixes it? Nobody has any money to fix it. So that's one of the, I'm not saying you can't get around it, but that is an issue that does probably enter in. Now, the one that I think we can probably do some of the most part is improving the operation and delivery of the existing systems. Now, when I was back 20 years ago, when I was a kid, on Walker River, the water ran year-round through the ditches. They were dirt ditches, but they ran year-round. They didn't shut them off, they just ran continually. And the excess water went down to what we call the lake pasture. And those were the areas that they turned the cattle, that's where the cattle grazed in the summertime, down in the summer lake pasture. Now, with the concrete ditches, a few things happen. Yes, we get the water down quicker, but one of the things that was eliminated was the use of stock water in the wintertime. So that's another issue, and I think Duck Valley, you're facing that issue right now about, you know, how do you deliver stock water? And cattle up there is one of the primary economies of that reservation. So you know, you just can't put in a new system and expect no stock water to come. So that is something that has to be addressed. Okay, again, when these are the things that happened on the Walker River. We went from dirt ditches to concrete ditches, and with that, we thought we were in heaven when they first started that, because man, that water just rushed down there, and we get the water in a third of the time that it would take through the dirt ditches. And right now, even with the concrete ditches and down to the end of the line to where I'm at, it takes, and that's from the diversion dam, it's not from the reservoir. So if they turn the water on at the diversion dam, and it gets down to me about 8 hours later. So that's how long, and that's in a concrete ditch. So with the dirt ditches, I would say it took probably twice as long, and we had twice the loss. So again, you know, these are things that can be done. The concrete ditches, yes, it's good, but they don't last forever. And as Alvita said, back in the 70s, we had a lot of concrete ditch go in, and now that is to the point that we had quite a few blowouts this year on that some of that ditching that was done then. So it's not a fix that will last forever. So it's something that has to be redone. Pipelines. This is something that I have had very good experience with on the reservation. Now, one of the things that it does is that most of the pipelines, when you go in, if you go by NRCS specs, they got to be at least 30 inches below the ground. So you got to bury them, which means you have to have a structure where the water comes in, drop it down at least 30 inches or more than that probably, and then and then you go on a grade, and then when you come up, it pops up again. So what that does is it allows water to stay in the pipe when you're not using it. So you don't empty out the water on the whole system to recharge those lines. Because right now on the pipelines, if you turn the water in on the one end, within minutes or even seconds, it comes out on the other end because the water is already charged. So you're just pushing the water in and out. So that is a way of saving water. And you figure if you do that 7 times a year to fill your ditches, you know, how much water are you looking at there? You're saving quite a bit, especially if you have a long way to go. So that is one option that I really like about it. Another thing is that, of course, we're pretty early on this, maintenance-wise. There virtually is no maintenance on this except for the entrance coming in and coming out. It's buried. So, you know, you don't have weeds to contend with, you don't have concrete patching to go fix, and things like that. So, right now, my opinion is that pipelines are probably the way of the future if you want to conserve your existing water rights and make it go further than what you're doing now. So that would be one of the items there that you can look at. That's a dirt ditch, and when it's clean, the water goes down pretty quick. When it gets like this, it's twice as long. So it's twice as long to get the water down the other end. This ditch here goes down about, a half a mile, and it takes me an hour and a half to turn the water up on the upper end here before it comes out down the bottom. Now, here's a concrete ditch. Now, this was one of the later ones that were put in, but you can kind of see the maintenance where they had to patch it. And a lot of times, if it's not put in right, when you have a rain, it'll wash in from the outsides, and if the water gets behind those panels, it'll wash them out, and that's where you get into your problems with the maintenance, because once you wash them out, then the water can get behind it, and then that's where your issues are. Now, the most recent one, now this is a 48-inch pipe that was put in on the last project, and you can kind of see what they did is they dug it out and then they backfilled with gravel. I don't know, that was the specs lead that they had. So with NRCS, you got to backfill on some of the rockier ground, but this is sandier ground. So The reason for that, I don't know why, but that was something that was in the specs, which the engineers probably know why that's for. Maybe it holds better and things like that, but that's what was done. So they had to haul in that gravel. So that was, an extra expense to do that with. But this is the end of the project, to where they have they had some, I don't know how many, they had 130 yards of concrete, I think, going to that, is what I was told. And that's a pretty deep structure. It goes down quite a ways. And what it is about right in here, it has a concrete lip that goes over. The water has to back up to that before it goes over to that. And on the side here, we have one turnout going this way and one turnout going this other way. So you don't have to deal with opening up the main ditch once you finish irrigating. You just shut it off, and the water automatically flows over the top, which kind of reduces the time. And if somebody turns loose upstream and you're irrigating here, the water automatically goes over. It doesn't create a situation to where you're flooding out and creating damage to other irrigators below you. Because that's one thing that often happens on these ditches and things like that. Now, one thing I found, Pete, is that down in here, where that water stays in the pipe, I did find a fishing hole. Because down here, those fish, they kind of sit down in the bottom of that, so. But it came from Weber. So there's catfish and bass and perch in there.
Darling, can just go get a fish.
So me and my grandson, that's where we're gonna go fish. But that's kind of what I want. My presentation is kind of short, but that's the information I wanted to relay to you, that within the existing systems, you can do things to save a lot of water. And I think pipelines right now is probably the greatest thing that you can do in order to conserve your existing water right. Because going after future water rights, that's virtually impossible. I don't say quit trying, but it's going to take a lot of years to accomplish. Justifying that is kind of the process that you're going to have to go through. So if you can fix what you have to make it last longer or serve more people, then I think that's the direction that the Indian tribes ought to be looking at. Kind of doing that. Okay, questions? Yes?
I'm not sure exactly how much time I have, but I'll keep everyone till 6:30. My name is Carly McClellan, and I originally grew up in Cameron, Arizona, which is about 50 miles north of Flagstaff, Arizona. And I am full Navajo. Those of you who are Navajo speakers here, my clans are Ashkanatsa and Kinani, I just introduced my clans in Navajo. Just a little quick brief background. I went to school at NAU and got my bachelor's degree in chemistry and worked in a lot of environmental laboratories for many years. Did some work for environmental consulting firms doing remediation. Did a lot of academic research in my undergraduate years, and then 3 years ago I took a position as a senior hydrologist with the Navajo Nation Water Management Branch. Still working with water, just at a different angle. So I have an extensive amount of experience in water quality that what I'm doing now, it's new and exciting, and I'm learning on the job as I go, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it. 3 years ago, we had when I first came on into my position, the Navajo Nation Water Management Branch was working with a NASA developed team, which is kind of a short-term project where a bunch of interns come in and they develop a project or a task in a kind of a very short time period. And during that time, the NASA developed team worked on a tool known as DSAT. So that DSAT kind of took some turns and developed into what it is today. Currently, this talk that I'm giving is going to be NASA-based satellite drought reporting of the Navajo Nation. So thank you for having me, and I will try to be mindful of the time as well, so I hope I can, I have a lot of material to show you, so I hope I don't...
Did that clicker?
Yeah, I hope I don't... which one's...
Right here. Okay, frontwards, backwards, and a pointer.
So I hope I don't go over too long. But first I wanted to start by giving you a brief background on NASA's work in applied sciences. And then a little bit later on I'll hone in on a specific project we're working on, and as it relates to drought monitoring in the Navajo Nation. And so if you see this next slide here, you see kind of an animated version of the satellites that orbit the Earth. And so you can see that there's with all these satellites, they collect a lot of different data. And so some of the data that's being collected is directly related to the project that I'm involved in. And you can see that the fleet of satellites that collect data around at the same time are, it's called, NASA calls it their A train. It's shown in green. And many of the joint missions, many of these are joint missions with other countries and agencies. So NASA does a lot of work, not only locally, but around the world as well. They collect measurements of rainfall, cloud, sea surface height, ocean salinity, and other aspects of the environment. Together, all these measurements help scientists to better diagnose the health of the Earth system. Let's see here. So you'll see that within Earth Science, NASA has an applied sciences program that focuses on the use of NASA data for real-world decision-making, and they have multiple focus areas that are listed here. And here is listed water resources and capacity building. You can see they have ecological forecasting, stuff that's related to disasters, wildfire, health and air quality, water resources, and capacity building. And from what I've seen within capacity building, NASA is doing a lot of outreach to a lot of third world countries as well too that are underserved, and also they're doing a lot of outreach to Native American tribes who have been underserved for many, many years as well. And so this is a slide of the Indigenous Peoples Capacity Building Initiative. And so my partner in crime that I've been working with from the NASA end, and her name is Dr. Amber McCollum. And so she is also in charge of, within NASA, she's involved with the Indigenous Peoples Capacity Building Initiative. And That's where they seek to use remote sensing training to Native American communities through a place-based approach and community engagement, and also the eventual incorporation of traditional and ecological knowledge into the teaching and learning objectives. And so those are just a few pictures from one of the recent trainings, and it was where they partnered with the Salish Indian Nation and Northwest Indian College in Bellingham, Washington. So they also had a GIS conference that was held in Albuquerque, and it was a joint training with BIA Denver last year, Denver, Colorado. So a lot of you can see that the three pillars of the initiative include community engagement. It also includes place-based approaches and technical workshops. Also, just wanted to also say on behalf of my colleague, Amber McCullum, or collaborator, that since she is heavily involved with doing outreach to Native American tribes, that if you have an interest in that, let me know, and I could forward that information on to her to connect you with any opportunities that you may be interested as it relates to remote sensing training. And so this slide here is just some of the other projects that NASA focuses on as it relates to water resources. They focus on projects such as irrigation management in California, snowpack monitoring with aircraft. You can see here that this is an ASO airplane, which is airborne snow observation. And they pretty much use a lot of the state-of-the-art technology where they fly airplanes over a mountainous region. And they use LiDAR and other sensors to calculate snow depth and snow water equivalent in 3D dimension. So we recently applied with NASA for to do an ASO study on the Navajo mountain ranges, and we kind of put in a last-ditch effort to pursue end-of-year funds, but that didn't go through. But we're also hopeful in the possibility that will be approved for future funding in the subsequent years coming. So the next slide here is the Western Water Applications Office, and it's a new program in applied sciences, and it's also known as WAIO. This program is focused on accelerating the application of NASA data for tangible and important and timely water management problems. The focus of this program is to really work with stakeholders like the Navajo Nation, and also our current drought project that we're working on. This tool that we're developing, and so within NASA, they are really pursuing to do a lot of capacity outreach with different tribes. So if there's also an interest from some of the various tribes to pursue capacity building and do work on NASA-related projects pertaining to your needs, again, let me know, and I will make sure that I connect you with Dr. Amber McCullum. So on to the project that we're working on. And so this is a satellite-based drought reporting on the Navajo Nation. And so, as many of you know, the Navajo Nation is the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States. And it's got a population of over 200,000 and has a total land area of 70,000 square kilometers. And so it spans Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. I say Colorado because the Navajo Nation recently purchased a ranch in Colorado. So we have, before we didn't really have any lands in Colorado, but now we do. So we have Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and Colorado, that ranch that was recently purchased. And so within the Navajo Nation, we have agencies, and so those agencies are synonymous to U.S. states, and then within those agencies we have chapters, and those chapters are synonymous to like U.S. counties. And so a little background on the Navajo Nation Water Monitoring Inventory. I oversee this program, and within the Water Management Branch and within the Water Monitoring Inventory, with the data that we collect, it helps to provide technical support for litigation and negotiating water rights. It also helps to develop regional water management plans, and it also documents and monitors water resources. And it maintains a water resource database. Within the program I oversee, we monitor a total of 9 stream gauges, 8 snow survey sites, 2 of which are SNOTEL sites. We have a precipitation network of 85 rain cans throughout the whole Navajo Nation. We have about a dozen climate stations, and we also do drought monitoring, and I produce the monthly drought reports for the Navajo Nation as well. This is just a picture of all the rain cans that we have on the Navajo Nation. You can see that we have more rain cans that are scattered throughout the Cheska Mountains because we have more rainfall there due to the orographic contributions from the mountain ranges. And then, of course, the Western Agency, where you get more of the flatlands, they're a little bit more sparsely scattered. And, the density of the rain cans are nowhere as much as you would see throughout the Cheska Mountains, but they are, to our best ability, strategically placed based off of elevation and based off of climate divisions. And so some of the challenges that we face on the Navajo Nation as it relates to drought and being stewards of the land is that some of the things that were once considered a livelihood for us and our blessings, so to speak, in owning livestock and farming, and so there was a kind of an old paradigm that followed the lines that the more livestock you had, the more richer you were, and so and I say this is an old paradigm because that was the old school way of thinking, and as we are in the time and era that we are in now, there's been a paradigm shift where we are now dealing with overgrazing issues, so I guess what was our livelihood is and what was our blessing is kind of becoming our curse. We have a lot of issues where we have overpopulation of feral horses, we've got overpopulation of livestock. Even with the livestock that we have issues of compliance. We have people that are supposed to have livestock permits. Within that permit, they're supposed to have so many heads of cattle and so many heads of sheep, and they're supposed to be within that limit. And a lot of people are over, and also in some cases, some people even own livestock without a permit, and so compliance is a huge issue as well too. Within, as it relates to enforcement, we don't have a lot of people, staff within the nation to do this type of enforcement, where you go to each livestock permittee holder and say, hey, you're out of compliance, you need to reduce your herd, so the enforcement, even sometimes in some cases when they go to court, they just get dismissed. So we have a huge issue with that. We have issues with invasive plant species, topsoil erosion, desertification, which is directly stemming from the overgrazing, and water shortages for agriculture, livestock, and domestic use, ongoing drought conditions, and groundwater depletion. As our company partner had mentioned, they're experiencing groundwater depletions as well. We're experiencing the same, and so you can see that the Navajo Nation experiences frequent and pervasive droughts. And we recently reissued a new drought declaration as of February 26th of this year. So based off of the current conditions that we're experiencing, and so here is just some examples of the U.S. Drought Monitor map in May of this year, and then just to show you as an example that a lot of times per the U.S. Drought Monitor, most recent one we've been in D3, D4 stage here, which is pretty severe. So in terms of the climate and the hydrology, Navajo Nation experiences large swings in climate from season to season and from year to year. And so a lot of times the climate in this region is punctuated by two wet periods. The winter, which is from December through March, and the other is during the monsoon season, from July through September. And so precipitation variability over recent decades is somewhat different than patterns observed from the earlier time record. And you can see that since the wet period in the 1980s, annual precipitation amounts have experienced above average and below average levels. You can see here from the 1980s here, we were, here it is, from the 1980s. This one's the precipitation anomaly. And so here, 1980s, we got a lot of those green lines into positive. We're getting some good rainfall, and then we hit some pretty severe drought spikes in the negative, in the red zone, and then we've had a couple of pretty good spikes in precipitation, and so you get these large swings back and forth. And so oftentimes when you have these swings, it's you get these patterns that switch rapidly between above average and below average levels. It produces an intense short-term drought conditions and unusually wet conditions as well. And when an intense drought event is followed by a short but intense wet period, it's often difficult to determine if and where the drought conditions have improved. So this situation necessitates to examine drought indices that represent moderate timescales of drought monitoring. And so with the next slide, this here, these pictures here that you see is consistent with a lot of what we've heard today from some of the other speakers, where on the Navajo Nation, there's a lot of people that are still hauling water, that are still relying on having their own pickup trucks and hauling water to their homes. And so there's roughly 40 to 55% of homes that are still lacking water and direct access to public water systems. And also there's an increased water hauling during these dry periods. There was, I don't have the numbers on with me, but there were some studies that showed that the cost per gallon is pretty high for Navajo people because they haul their water. If you take into account the maintenance of their vehicle, the gas they spend, and the miles they haul to haul the water to their homes, it's like it's a significant amount of the price per gallon when you add all those costs up. compared to the average that the rest of the average U.S. citizen might be getting. So I wish I would have put some of those numbers together, but take my word for it, it's pretty high to haul your own water, and the cost for each gallon is significant. Mitigation efforts are resource intensive and also limited preset and data, runoff data. And also we have, with a lot of the data that we rely on for drought reporting is coming from the Western Regional Climate Center. Oftentimes in our drought contingency plan, we primarily look at the 6-month SPI as a drought index to make a majority of our decisions. And so the thing is that, you know, there's a lot of data that we collect on the Navajo Nation, but that data is not integrated in with other entities like PRISM or CHIRPS or National Weather Service. And so oftentimes it provides a really poor spatial resolution. So we are hoping to solve that problem with the project we're working on. And so next slide here. I produced, like I said, the monthly drought reports for the Navajo Nation. And so we heavily rely on monitoring the 6-month SPI. But just as a side note, we are also in the process of updating our drought contingency plan. And if you look at a lot of drought contingency plans for various government entities, somewhere in there, oftentimes it will spell out in detail the indices, drought indices that they look at. Like if it's a farming community, you know, there's certain indices that might be related to soil moisture that they will heavily focus on and look at. And so, but part of the flaw with the current plan that we have, it only looks at the 6-month SPI indice. And so we want to, as we're doing the revisions now, we want to incorporate other indices such as the Polar Index and SPEI, look more closely at EDDI, to look at the contributions of drought as it pertains to the influences coming from solar radiation, heat, and also from wind speed. So we all know that the hotter it gets and the more wind blows, the more it contributes to evapotranspiration. So that's part of the reason why we want to look a little bit more closely at EDDI and incorporate that into our drought contingency plan. And that's kind of alludes to you know, a little bit of the other things that I have listed here in the bullet points, where when we do drought designations and also mitigation plans, that will all add to helping for future planning. And so that is kind of where things stand.